Welcome to the California Automated Drone Podcast, where we talk to experts in the field about their experiences in the drone industry. I am your host, Josh Friedman, and I am so excited that today we are here with my friend Chris Cruz, who teaches at West Valley College with a really interesting program about GIS and drones.
There are drone sports community groups in just about every community.
Oh, I want to be a drone service provider and I'm going to go do drone mapping. Well, for what?
All of the things that I've done is to promote safety for our industry.
But if you really want to go in depth into understanding what you're doing, a community college along with online learning is a way to go.
Hey Chris, so great to see you. Where are you coming from today?
So we're looking at the West Valley College campus in Saratoga, California. And here at West Valley, we have a 2-year park management program that also includes a geospatial technology certificate program and our unmanned aircraft technology certificate program.
I love it. And we're going to talk a little about your history. But one of the things I love about the history of your program at West Valley is that you partnered up with somebody who actually created an aviation department so you could teach drone classes. Can you tell me a little bit about that background there?
Yes. On campus, I have a colleague named Benjamin Mendelson, and he's been an aviator for 30 plus years. And we've tried to figure out, how do we get aviation into the college? And when we started looking at UAS, that became our ticket in. And Benjamin's been a flight instructor and pilot for 30 plus years. And so with that natural background in aviation, we brought in that along with our UAS technology. And that's how we formed our program. It was something that he was always interested in, but we didn't have quite a way to bring in aviation into the college, and the UAS component allowed us to do that.
And I believe he was a math teacher as well before. Am I correct on my memory serving?
No, Benjamin actually teaches astronomy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he also teaches physics, but his primary area is astronomy.
I love it. And then let's talk about your background a little bit, because you've got a very unique background. You've been teaching at that college for a very long time, but my understanding is that your background is in forestry and teaching classes in forestry. Is that correct? And if so, how did that lead to drones?
Actually, my background was with the National Park Service, and I worked for the National Park Service for 28 years. And I worked for the Park Service even while I was still teaching at the college. I've been at West Valley for 22 years now. But my background with the National Parks is working in several disciplines. So interpretation, providing visitors with information and presentations about the park. But the lion's share of my career has been in emergency operations, working as a ranger, doing law enforcement, search and rescue, fire, medical, resource management. I've done, everything from backcountry patrols, horse patrols, river patrols, in a number of different locations. Here in California, I've worked at Yosemite National Park, Lassen Volcanic National Park, but around the country, places like Grand Canyon, Grand Tetons, Everglades, Biscayne National Parks, Haleakala in Hawaii. And actually, Haleakala is kind of an interesting point for all this related to the GIS side, because I started the idea of using GIS for doing structural fire mapping for our engine when we go to different parts of the park. And that's how I got really kind of into the GIS side of things when I was working at Haleakala back in 1996. And so from there, I continued exploring the GIS side, and I ended up working on a master's degree at Prescott College in cultural resources management, but it was also a geospatial focus to that. And so that's really how I kind of got started on the GIS side. But prior to that, at Indiana University, I studied physical geography. And back in the day when I was doing that, we were using pretty antiquated techniques, Fortran programming for mapping, and a lot of hand-drawn maps and hand-lettered maps, which now are done digitally, and it's so much easier now in the GIS world when you're using products like ArcGIS Pro and Pix4D. There's a lot of capability now built into that rather than doing things by hand.
I'm actually curious, for those who don't know, what does GIS stand for, and what are some of the skills that people need to have if they want to work doing GIS work?
So GIS, when you look at the traditional definitions, it's geographic information science or geographic information systems. And basically, we use the term geospatial technology, and it encompasses three major areas. One, the GIS side, which is actually the production of the maps, collecting the data, putting it into your map. The other side is remote sensing. So if you need to use imagery, whether it be satellite imagery or in this case drone imagery to bring into a project. And then there's the GPS technology, which drones use, and we use GPS units in mapping to get location and to define the areas that we're working in. In this particular circumstance, we use drone technology, which incorporates GPS in the drone, and then we take the data that's collected from the drone and use it in our GIS to do mapping. And our geospatial program has been around for about 20 years here at West Valley. And we've also added this drone technology program now that allows us to collect data differently. So now, rather than being on the ground, we can actually be in the air and collect imagery and then process it and get greater spatial resolution for the imagery that we have. What you're seeing in the screen now is just an overall image of the college campus. But what we've done is we've actually done flights on campus and gotten more detailed imagery as we go.
So I want to back up just a little bit. So I'm looking at the Pix4D model that you have right here. What are the red dots that we're seeing?
The red dots are the series of images that were taken. We flew the mission. We got probably close to a couple hundred images, and we did what they call a double grid. And a double grid allows us to get increased coverage over a particular area. And so I can zoom in a little bit, but you can see the grid pattern that's been set up. And what the double grid actually does, it allows you to connect up the key points between images. So any identical point in another image, once it's connected together, allows us to create a finer resolution with things on the ground, but it also gives us the capability down the line to do 3D work and that. So this was a mission that Benjamin and I flew in our open space area at West Valley College. That's right near Vasona Creek. Vasona Creek, we've been involved in the park management program in doing restoration of the creek. And so what we're doing here is taking imagery of our open space area on campus that we've also done restoration work in. And you can also see the trail that's into that area. Our students, along with our facilities folks, built that trail, and it was designed by one of our students. So we spend a lot of time looking at the campus and actually managing our resources that we have. And the drone work is just an add-on item that we can do to get further detail of our land resources on campus.
I love it. And you may have heard in the background, I'm going to keep him in, I'm going to keep this in, but I'll introduce everyone to Yogi. This is the office security head. He's just warning me that there's someone near the door. But either way, I want to take just a half step back while I have Yogi in my lap and kind of reiterate that, when we're flying this kind of work, and my company, we do this as well, the drone is automated. So we set, as you can see, keep the screen share there, I'll show you. You set that rectangle, and then the drone literally flies by itself going up in the sky, and it flies one direction, does the grid that way, and what you're saying with the double grid is then it flies the opposite direction like this, and captures all the images, and then literally just lands itself. And then you use this data for all types of different things. What are some of the industries that are using data like this and using drones for GIS?
Well, you can pretty much make a long list. Agriculture is a big one in California, the film industry. When you look at the natural resource and cultural resource management, transportation, emergency response, in a lot of different ways are using drones, not only for search, but also for mapping and for remote identification of resources or things that need to be looked at. Like, say, for example, if a tanker truck with a hazardous material dumped over on the side of the highway, you wouldn't want a person close to it, but you could fly a drone over it with a sensor that might sense whatever that material is, and determine what the safety level is for people to actually go in. So it reduces risk in a lot of ways on an emergency response side, but it also allows us to get more detailed imagery. If you're using satellite imagery from Landsat, you require, basically a 16-day period to get a full picture of the Earth. But with a drone, the repeat time is much quicker. If we wanted to take an image of one particular area, we could do that one area every single day and see changes. And so the beauty of the drone is you can cover a smaller area, greater detail, less repeat time, and that allows us to do some pretty critical work in a timely fashion.
And there's so much work out there. I mean, we're doing this for construction quite frequently, but we're seeing this type of work with solar panels, wind turbine fields, gas pipelines. I have friends who are using this for science, a lot of science projects, tracking beaver dams, and my favorite are the weekly projects, obviously, because it's steady and it goes on going for a while. But there are, as you mentioned, there's daily projects where literally every single day you're mapping a site, and then there's software that you can see the difference. Let's talk about measurements as well. How has flying drones for GIS helped with getting measurements of some of these areas? And what are some of the capabilities with measuring space once you have the model created?
So this is actually a pretty interesting conversation because I was at a conference on drones several years ago in Reno, Nevada. And I remember talking to some folks about photogrammetry, and traditional photogrammetry was done with aircraft. And at that conference, I was told by somebody that was a photogrammetry specialist that drones would never be involved in the photogrammetric side of imagery. And I just kind of looked at him and I thought, I don't think you're right, but I wasn't going to pitch that argument there. But now, we're looking at 5-6 years forward, and drone technology and data collection with drones is a part of the photogrammatic side of the industry, of the mapping industry. And it's an intrinsic part of it now. And what's really nice is when you get that really finer resolution, it gives you much more detail, not only in imagery, but also from a measurement side, you have that capacity. And you've always had the capacity in GIS with the current softwares to measure things and measure distance, measure volume, calculate volumes. And with softwares like Pix4D, you can specifically calculate volumes. So let's say, for example, you're flying over an open pit mine, and you're looking at measuring what's being taken out on a daily basis. You can do that. Those volumetric measurements are really valuable on the mining industry side. When you're looking at areas where the space requirements change, you can measure those space changes based on the imagery that you're taking. So if you take an image in a particular location, let's say, for example, let's say it's a fire. If you have an area that you have imagery prior to the fire, and now you have imagery of that same exact area after the fire, you can determine in space how much area was burned. You can calculate that information just based on the imagery that's there that you put into whatever software package you're using. And so it becomes really valuable, and you can turn this information around pretty quickly if you have the right tools available to you.
I did another episode with Angan Singh formerly from Pix4D, and he was giving us a demonstration on Pix4D React, and I highly recommend anybody who's seeing this episode, make sure you also watch the episode with Angad. One of the tricky things about this work, Chris, I've found is that every state has different laws of surveying and what people are allowed to do as a surveyor and what things you are required to be a surveyor in order to do. Right. Without getting too into the legalese, I want to ask, what skills would you require, or what you think some people should have before just jumping into GIS with drones? Because as we have learned, you can't just go out. I can't just go out without a surveyor's license and do surveying work. That said, what are some of the skills that people have before doing that, or they should have if they're going to go out and do this legally, at least in the state of California?
So, first thing, I think the key word there is survey. If you're doing survey work that's specific, then you need to follow the legal regulations for that particular location, that area, that part of the industry. Because if you're actually a surveyor, you have to have certain licensing, you have to have certain requirements that you meet. Now, on the geospatial side, surveying work is contributory to the GIS side. From a GIS standpoint, you need to have experience in working with various softwares. You need to have some level of education and or training to utilize the data that's being collected. Say a surveyor might collect specific data, and that data set then can be employed by somebody that's running the GIS mapping project and plug that information in. So there's a separation a little bit between the actual surveyor and the data they collect, and then the person who manipulates it and works with it to create the maps, say, for example, like zoning maps for a city or a town or a community. I had a student once that was working for City of Campbell, and City of Campbell needed a new zoning map. Well, she was able to acquire the data from various sources, and then as a result of her work in class, create a new zoning map for the City of Campbell. And so usually it's kind of compartmentalized where you have somebody that may be in the field, like a surveyor, collecting the data and the information, and then gives it to somebody that has the savvy to work with the geospatial software, whether it's ArcGIS Pro or QGIS or some of the other open source products that are out there.
Yeah, and I think that you hit the nail on the head there in that, I have found that by doing this type of work, it's introduced me to a whole bunch of people I never thought I would ever meet or collaborate with, and that it really does, in some cases, require collaboration in order to do this legally. If you are not a surveyor and you're interested in using drones for GIS, you may want to meet some surveyors or meet some companies that can do the additional work, whether it's an architect or a surveyor, right? Whereas we create the data, we provide the data, and then they're the ones that actually certify it and take it to the next level. So, Chris, I'm so glad we had some time to do this. What else? Anything else you want to add before we conclude today?
Well, I would say that, when it comes to the drone industry in general, it's still continuing to grow. Anybody that decides to do work within the drone industry, I think, is going to have a pretty good future ahead of them, because there's so many new ideas, so many new use cases that are coming up nowadays. And I just saw a really interesting use case the other day for the first time, and I want to share this with you because it was such a cool thing. So I was shared by a colleague a video from the Israeli army, and it was a really cool thing where they were working with Israel's Department of Natural Resources, whatever their name for that is, and there's a vulture, a raptor called the griffon vulture, that is extremely rare and endangered. And in this particular case, the chick had lost the mother and the father was still there, but they needed to have support to feed the chick in addition to the father. So what they did was they used an Israeli-designed drone to actually drop food on this cliff ledge to support that baby griffon vulture. And the video is pretty incredible because it goes through the whole process, and then it also shows the first time that particular young chick actually flew. And so you combined proprietary technology that the Israeli military had produced and then used it for conservation purposes, which was pretty awesome. And I'd never seen that done before. And so according to the video, they practiced quite a bit on a fake cliff ledge, and then got it down to a science where they could drop food on a consistent basis to that griffon vulture chick. And now, that bird has grown up, it's flown, and it was a fascinating use. And it was combining, military technology designed in Israel to a conservation organization based in Israel to serve the purpose of taking care of that particular animal. And in my mind, that's really an example of classic good work that can be done to protect our, both our natural and our cultural resources. And in our program at West Valley, our park management program, that's what we've been about for over 51 years. And technology is just that extra added piece that allows us to do these really amazing things. But that was a really great example of a use of drone technology.
I love that so much. Chris, I'm so glad you were able to do this. I am going to go and look up that article now as well. If I can find it, I'm going to put it up.
I'll send you a
great,
link.
And we'll put that link in the notes as well. Chris, thank you so much for being here, for sharing your knowledge with us and teaching us a little bit about GIS and what's happening up at West Valley College. And thanks so much for everybody who's watching or listening. If you want more information about drone careers, where you can get educated to help your drone career take off, please go to californiaautomated.com. Find us on social media, like, share, subscribe, and learn. This has been another episode of the California Automated Drone Podcast. Again, I'm your host, Josh Friedman, and we were here today with Chris Cruz. We're both reminding you to fly safe and fly often.